story time. I'm so glad that you're back for another classic fairy tale. Now, today's story, as I mentioned last week, is about a prince. But it's not necessarily the usual type of prince that you would think. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I will begin the tale of the Frog Prince. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful princess who lived in a faraway kingdom. Her father had betrothed her to marry the crown prince of another country. Unfortunately, the crown prince disappeared, and his younger brother started attempting to court her. She wasn't much interested in him, unfortunately, and though his advances persisted, she didn't feel the inclination to return them. Now one day, the princess was playing with a ball, a golden ball that her mother had given her before she died. She was playing by a small pond, secluded in the middle of the palace gardens. It was a beautiful place that she loved to go. Unfortunately, just as she was playing by the pool really carefully so as not to drop the ball in, she heard a large croak. The croak surprised her so much that she dropped the ball. She couldn't feel the bottom of the pool, and she knew that it would sink all the way down. Her heart filled with longing for it, and just as it did, a voice beside her said, "I could get it for you if you like." She looked, and there, sitting on the side of the pavement, was a frog. Too distraught to realise that the frog was talking, she said, "Oh, please, please, that would be lovely. I will have to ask you for a favour afterwards, though." "Very well," she said. That's not a problem. I promise anything. Just please get my ball back." The frog dived down to the bottom of the pool and came up swimming with the ball on top of, nudging the ball on top of him. The princess snatched the ball up. Thank you so much," she cried, starting to walk away. Said the frog. The princess realised that the frog was talking. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she thought, hang on, frogs don't talk. What's going on? But it rushed out of her mind the next second. She turned and looked at the frog. "I asked for a favour? You did promise." Now the princess knew that promises had to be kept. It was one thing she'd always been taught. She didn't really want to because it was a frog. But she said, "Very well. What is the favour?" "I would dine with you tonight at the palace." The princess stared, quite bewildered. "Pondweed only goes so far," he explained. "Very well," she replied, starting to head back to the palace. She was beginning to realise that she'd made a promise rather irrationally in a time of great need, and she was not sure whether it was a good idea now. As the princess went to get ready, the thoughts of the frog stayed in her mind until they came to supper. Supper was served at around 7, and at about 7:05 there was a thump at the door. There was a door out to the garden where the king and the princess ate. The princess went and opened the door and looked down. There sat the frog. "Oh, it's you," she said. You did promise, said the frog. I did, she said. She picked him up, she held out her hands, and he jumped into them. She loathed the feeling of the clammy feet against her skin. But nevertheless, she carried him to the table and placed him gently there. The king looked at her. He helped me earlier, the princess replied. Very well, said the king, and treated the frog like an honoured guest. The princess stared, almost barely touching her food, sitting there open-mouthed, as the frog and the king conversed. Soon she began to get tired and started to head towards her room. A cough came from the frog's voice. I would ask another favour, my dear, he said. Very well, said the princess, really not wanting to do this. What is it this time? I would come and spend the night in your room, he asked. She braced herself. Very well. And she picked up the frog and walked through to her bedroom. She started to get changed, and as she went to get into bed, the frog looked at her one last time. One final favour, Your Highness, he asked. She breathed, really not wanting to do this. Very well. What is it? She asked. I would sleep on your pillow tonight. Her face creased in revulsion at the thought of sleeping next to a frog. You did promise, he reminded her. She looked down at her feet. I'm beginning to regret I did, she muttered under her breath, hoping that the frog didn't hear her, although she knew he probably had. Very well, she snapped, climbed into bed with him. As she went to sleep, she felt a cold, clammy, webbed foot on her face. Finally, she could take it no longer. She picked up the frog and threw him at the wall. And then stared in amazement. For there, instead of a frog, was the crown prince of the neighbouring country. And she was shocked. But, huh? She exclaimed. I think there needs to be some explanation, does there not, my dear? Smiled the crown prince at her. All the feelings she'd ever had for him, the walks they'd been on, the romantic meals, the time spent alone together came rushing back. Very dumbly, she nodded. He took her hand and walked her back through to the dining room, where the king sat. Your Majesty, the prince bowed to the king. Your Royal Highness, bowed the king to the prince, as if he knew that this was happening. The prince offered the princess a seat, bade her sit down, and then sat down himself. My brother has been courting you, has he not, Your Highness? My dear prince, you know very well that he has, she smiled at him. Might I explain, please? Very well. She sat there, hands together, eagerly waiting to hear the story behind this. My brother always hated me. He wanted the throne for himself, and so though I did not know it, he started using the black arts to gain power over me. He had plenty of wealth. He did not have the kingdom, and that is what he wanted. One day, I got an invitation from him. I thought that he wanted to repair things, so I went to visit him. The moment I stepped into his study, I heard words being chanted, something blasting my chest. I felt and saw my hands changing into webbed feet, my eyes beginning to bulge, my body shrinking. And when I opened my mouth to speak, at first there was nothing but a large sounding croak. I hopped over to a mirror and saw, instead of myself, a frog. I vowed to find a way to reverse this curse so that he could not take control of your lands as well. I watched him as he took over my duties and smothered my kingdom in darkness. I watched and rode with him, though he did not know it, as I'd snuck into his saddlebag as he came to court you. I decided to stay here, almost as a form of protection against anything happening to you, but I did not know fully how to protect you. One night, I was waiting by the pond, and I saw an owl approaching. It was nearing sunset, and everything was alive. I worried that the owl would catch me, but almost before it landed, it changed. I recognized it, not as an owl, but as one of the protectors of my lands. It had recognized me and realized how much trouble I was in and how much trouble the kingdom was in. Your Majesty, it said, I have found a way to reverse the spell. All you need to do is this. He told me how to reverse the spell in the way that you did. It was the only way it could break, to make you angry enough to throw me against a wall. The other thing he told me, which I must admit I am rather pleased about, is that this kind of curse rebounds on the person who cast it when it comes off the person. So I am fairly certain that right now, back at the palace, my dear brother has turned into a frog. The princess tried to keep from laughing but could not. She could not believe this. It was a miracle, an amazing happenstance. I would come back with you, but I cannot unless I am married, she said rather cheekily. Well then, we're just going to have to do something about that, aren't we? Said the prince. Your Majesty, may I renew my betrothal towards your daughter? Of course, my dear future son-in-law. I will get everything prepared and ready for you to head back. As they walked down towards the pond together, they smiled at each other, hand in hand, and waited for the new day to arrive. The end. Thank you very, very much for listening. I really hope you're enjoying these. Please let me know if you are in the comments. I am having a massive amount of fun doing these, and one of the things I hope to do is introduce you to other fairy tales. Please note, as a disclaimer, and I know I haven't done a disclaimer for the last two, and I'll make sure I do in the comments, I do not own any of these stories. These stories have been passed down from generation to generation. Some of them are Grimm's tales, some of them are classic fairy tales. And I really hope that you're enjoying them, because I'm enjoying making these. And I really hope that this can carry on for a very long time. As usual, please rate, comment, subscribe, and let me know if you want me to do any more stories. I'm also up for doing if possible, if I can actually practice them and pull them off very well, I'm up for doing songs, ballads, anything like that. I can teach you how to make the gingerbread that I made for the gingerbread man, and I will hopefully see you all next week. Next week's story should be the story of a princess locked in a tower by slumber. I'm sure you can work that one out. I will hopefully see you next week. Bye!